An earnest young man once approached me after I'd preached at a church, and he came up to me and at first was rather complimentary, saying, "Gary, that was fantastic. I think it was inspired. It's just what we needed to hear." But then he added, "But why did you have to quote enemies of the gospel to make your point?" I kind of sighed because the two enemies of the gospel I had quoted were Francis of Assisi and an Eastern Orthodox monk. I knew where he was coming from theologically, and so I gently tried to say to him, well, Francis couldn't very well have been a Calvinist, could he, seeing as how Calvin wasn't born until 300 years after Francis had died. I said, do we really want to write off the entire Eastern branch of the church as if God had nothing to say to all that was happening in that world of people who were seeking His face and drawing near to Him? And then I said to him, as much as, like you, I've benefited so much from your particular tradition, do you really want to limit yourself to reading the three Johns, Calvin, Piper, and MacArthur? Now, I love all three of those guys, but my life has been so blessed by reading not only outside my tradition, but outside my generation, outside my century, and outside my continent, to understand how God has inspired and challenged people through all ages, in different lands, in different forms of the Christian church. Now, I agree that we have to be careful when we read some of the Christian classics. They're not Scripture. They're not inspired in the way Scripture is. In fact, it's by reading the Christian classics that I grow more in awe at the depth and the power of Scripture, because compared to Scripture, even the best human writings just don't measure up. But here's how I found that we can benefit from the Christian classics. We need to read the Christian classics like my wife eats Southern food and dessert. Sometimes when Lisa and I are traveling, we'll be in the South and they'll serve something that my wife really wouldn't normally choose to eat. She's a rather healthy eater, sort of organic type of person. We were at one meal where they served fried chicken, and that's not something that Lisa would choose on her own. But here's what she'll do. If she's left with just fried chicken, she'll look at that chicken and realize, well, I can't eat all of it, but she'll scrape off the skin and she'll try to pull out some of the meat, saying, you know what, this stuff isn't very good for me, but I think there's a little bit of meat in here. And the Christian classics are like that. You may not want to eat some of the skin surrounding the classics, but if you're willing to pull away that skin, you can find some good meat. And then she'll get to dessert and she'll see the cake, and she eats cake entirely differently than I do because she's kind of picking around the frosting. She doesn't want all that sugar. For a junk food guy like me, I'm thinking, forget the cake, just give me the frosting. For me, the cake is just what's there to hold the frosting together. But she'll enjoy that dessert by picking out some of the cake and enjoying that as well. That's what we can do with the Christian classics. We can learn from past ages of how God has moved on the hearts of men and women, and we can be inspired. I don't read the Christian classics to develop my theology. I read the Christian classics to feed my passion for God and to understand how He has inspired men and women throughout the ages. And I'd like to encourage you to do the same.